So today I thought it might be fun to make something a little bit different, and so we're going to be making cat ruffs. That 16th century collar that your pet has always dreamed of, you can now have for yourself. Before we get started, I do want to emphasize that it's most important to prioritize the safety and happiness of your pet. My cat ZB is very amenable to the little outfits that I like to put him in. However, if your cat is not so participatory, please do not force them. And at all times, animals should be watched while wearing costumes or collars because it could be dangerous. It could be a choking hazard. So please be safe and think of your pet first, costume second. For our supplies, we're going to start with a white polyester grosgrain, and you're going to need 3 yards of this. You'll also need 3 yards of a coordinating lace to put on the edge of the collar. I'm going to use this gold lace, but you could use a white flat lace or any sort of craft lace that you might have. 1/2 inch or under is preferred. And then we'll need something for the ties, so I'm going to use this gimp that I had, but you could also use a 1/8 inch wide ribbon, would work just as well. I just didn't have any in white. For our tools, we're going to start with some hand sewing needles. Just sharps are great, any general all-purpose needle. Thread snips, scissors, a lighter, a marking pencil. I'm going to use this one by Clover, but you could use any, even just a regular pencil would work for this. Some good tape, and then I'm going to use my sleeve board as an ironing board, but a regular ironing board and an iron. You don't need anything fancy with your ironing board. And of course, your sewing machine. We'll be using a machine for this. So we're going to start by making the neckband. This is the base of the ruff and what holds it all together. And to do so, what I want you to do is cut off 11 inches of the 3 yard piece of grosgrain that you have. So you wind up with a little piece like this. And then we're going to take the lighter and we're just going to melt the edges. Be really careful while doing this because it is quite hot and it will burn you. But this does seal in the grosgrain so it doesn't unravel on you. Only works on polyester, won't work on natural fibers. And then we're going to need 4 pieces of, I'm using gimp, but you could also use 1/8 inch ribbon. These are 10 inches long, but if you only have a yard, you could do 9 inches. It would work just the same. And essentially what we're going to be doing is putting these into the base, folding over 1/2 inch, and then stitching on top of there. You can use pins if you want, but I'm not going to use pins on mine. Now let's go to the machine and work over there. So I'm at my machine, which is threaded in a matching thread, and I have my stitch length set to a very short stitch. It's a zigzag stitch. It's set to a short 1, but a very wide 5. So we are going to want a short, wide zigzag stitch for this. And so to get started, what we do is fold over about 1/2 inch of your band, and then just tuck your ties in a little bit separate from each other. The exact position doesn't really matter, but we just want them tucked in a little bit separate. And then we're going to zigzag over where the fold line is, being sure to back stitch at front and back so that we lock those stitches in. And I'm just holding this with my hand, but if you're more comfortable, you can use pins. And when that's done, you wind up with something like this, and then we need to trim our threads. So our threads are trimmed now, and what we want to do is fold these over in this direction, and individually we're going to stitch along here with that same zigzag stitch. Again, remembering to start and end with a back stitch. That's one. And here's the other. Voila. And so we wind up with that. And now we're just going to go and trim our threads and then do the exact same thing on the other side of the ribbon. So now I've done this on both sides of my neckband, and what I'm going to do is just put this to the side. We will come back to this later. And then you're going to want to take your 3 yards of grosgrain and whatever lace trim you're using, and we're going to stitch these together on the machine. So what we're going to do now is we're going to stitch this piece of lace to the edge of this piece of grosgrain. The edge doesn't need to be lined up, but in order to do so, we're going to have to lengthen our stitch length. So our width is going to remain 5 on our zigzag, but we're going to take that length up. I've taken mine up to 3. You could go even longer if you wanted to, but whatever's comfortable for you. So to do so, I just put it in the machine. We have it set to zigzag, and we're going to remember to back stitch at the beginning, and we're just going to sew along the length of the ribbon. So once you have your lace sewn to the edge of your ribbon, you can just cut the lace to match. So you're close there. And then we're gonna put the lace to the side. And I am a huge believer in ironing. I iron everything. It makes your work look cleaner as you work. It gives you a better product at the end. So now we're just gonna press this ribbon gently with an iron. Nothing too crazy, and we're just gonna press, press, press. So now that we have our edges all cleaned up, what we're going to do first is we're just going to melt off the edge of this ribbon here to make sure that we have some clean edges. So I'm just going to take my lighter. Be really careful because melted polyester is quite hot and it will burn you. But so now you can see that I have a great clean edge there. And then I'm going to line this up on my measuring device, putting the edge flush. And what I'm gonna do is just mark off 1 inch increments along the entire length of the ribbon, just with a little dot. So if you're using regular pencil, same thing, just mark along the length. And this is a little under 3 yards long now, because remember we took some off for the collar and we trimmed it up. So you're gonna have quite a few dots, and this takes a little bit of time. And then you can see when we get to the edge here, there's not a full inch left. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut that off, like so. Because we want only full inch increments, and then we're gonna melt the edge here. Hopefully you backstitched enough, but if you did not backstitch enough and this is unraveling, you can stitch over it with your machine just for to help lock that in place. So now we're going to start the sewing part. So this is essentially like doing a very long gather, but with a little bit of a twist. And so what I want you to do is to thread your needle, but do not cut it off the spool. You can see that I'm still attached to my spool here, because what we're going to wind up needing is a 3 yard long piece of thread. And if you unspool it in advance, it can be a lot. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start at the very front. I'm going to skip the first dot and I'm going to start here at the second one. And I'm going to take on the front a tiny little stitch right around where we put that mark. Can you see that right there? So that's stitch 1. Then I'm going to skip the second one and I'm going to do the same tiny little stitch on the third dot. So you can see I did 1, skipped 1, did 1. And basically the entire length of the ribbon, do 1, skip 1. You just want to do a tiny little stitch, and you're always working from the front on this. Tiny little stitch, next. You're going to do this the whole length of the ribbon. You can see how it's kind of dragging up behind me, so you can just straighten that out. And because you're stuck to the spool, that thread will continue to unravel and fill in as you go. You can see, so now I'm at the end, and you can see I'm just going to make my ribbon straight again. And what I'm doing is I'm pushing all of the ribbon towards the end and taking more thread off the spool and filling it with thread. So we basically want to get this straight and have that stitch that we did every other stitch inside of here. It takes a minute and a little bit of finagling, but it will work as long as you did every other stitch from the front. And we're going to leave the ties loose on this, so there's no knots on the thread, because we're going to use this as a gathering stitch, and so we don't want to tie it off. So you're just going to leave long tails. It's fine, don't worry about it. And then we're going to stitch it again. So now what I want you to do is to turn the ribbon backwards so that you see how you have your dots on this side, and I want you to work from the back side of this. So now what you're going to do is you're going to rethread your needle with a new piece of thread, again keeping it on the spool, and with the dots that you marked facing away from you, I want you to start at whichever one at the beginning that doesn't have a stitch. So you're doing the opposite stitches from the back side. So I'm keeping this thread out of the way and taking a tiny stitch. And then I'm going to go to the next one, skip this one because that one already has a thread, go to the next one, tiny stitch. And again, I'm working on the reverse side of what I was working on last time. So again, tiny stitch. So we're at the edge of our ribbon, and we are just going to pull the thread out. Oops, I dropped it. And now we're just going to straighten the ribbon. So as you see, you have thread on both the front and the back. Put your needle down, and then just get your ribbon straight again. What I'm doing is I'm adding thread from the spool because we didn't cut the threads on the spool. So we're going to get this all straight. All right. And then once the ribbon is flat, you can cut it off the spool. So then we wind up with that. It looks like exactly what we started, right? Now, so herein lies the fun part. This is the trick. So because you did stitching on the left and the right side, inside and out. What you're going to want to do is then push this into your fingers, and you're going to see it's going to curl up. You see how it gathers up like that? And then you can just push it along the length of the ribbon. And if you did not tangle your stitches, it should pull pretty easily. You're going to want to do this from both ends of the ribbon to just kind of get it squared up. You can see it's cartridge pleating together. Sometimes the threads get a little tangled, but that's okay. As long as they're not sewn within one another, it will do this effect. So if you didn't see that the first time, we're going to do it again on the other side of the ribbon. You're just going to squish it up into your fingers, and it's going to make this great little box formation. And all I do is stick my finger in there and then pull the threads. And you are pulling the threads along the length. They are going to come out some. You're not going to pull them entirely out, but you are going to pull them until you get a little coil of cartridge pleated ribbon. So gather, gather, gather. Until you get something that looks like this. So we're almost at rough stage, right? It's looking pretty good. Right, so now what we need to do is we need to attach our ruff to our base. The first thing that we can do is we can trim some of these super long gathering threads that we no longer need anymore. So I usually trim them, you know, to about 18 inches, just pull them out and trim them because we're going to thread them individually into the needle. So now I got my ruff, I got 18-inch threads, and we're gonna start. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take one needle and put it on one corner, and you can see that it looks like this, and you can see that this goes like this. So if this were to lay on top the collar band, you would say that this would be the top corner. So we're just gonna sew the top corner into that thread. I want to tack it pretty good, so I usually stitch it a few times. Don't let its neighbor get caught in there, which is what it's trying to do right now, so you don't want to get that caught. So you sew that corner and then tie it off. You thread the next thread underneath it, and you want to connect it to the bottom part. So do the same exact thing, and we connect that end to the bottom part of that same corner. So then basically what we wind up having is that the collar is attached on one side. Okay, so now that we have this one side done, what we want to do is we want to lay the collar so that it's flat and that these two kind of line up together. They don't have to be exactly even just yet, but you just want to make sure that they're all going in the same direction and that nothing is twisted. It can help if you pull on the strings on the end. You kind of get it all corralled together, and you can see that it's going to start coming into a collar. And what you want to do is you want to thread the first of the two ends over here with a needle, and you want to connect these two, but let me show you how you do that. Right, so I have my needle threaded, and I know that these are going in the same direction. The coil is all in the same direction. The collar is not twisted, the base part. And so I'm just going to connect this into the end. And then the most important part is I need to make sure the tension is right. So you can see how it's not the same. So I'm just going to pull until they line up. Now you see how that lines up pretty good? So all I did was pull the band until it lines up. And because these are gathered stitches, it came right out. And now I'm just going to tie the edge in a knot. Now we're going to do the fourth corner. I've already threaded my needle for that fourth gathering thread. And all you want to do is, again, you want to slip it through here, through the collar, and you want to pull it to make sure it's tied up. Now in this case, this side, you can see the gathering is too big, but the collar is taut. So I'm just going to pull it tighter. And what you just want to do is try to get those two even. It doesn't matter where the gathers are. You're just trying to get them even. You can see that that's pretty good. They're going to lie even. They're going to be next to each other. And then once you get it there, you're just going to tie that edge into a knot. Stitch it into a knot, excuse me. I have a collar with some pleats on it, but they're not really attached together. So what we need to do is we need to tape this to our table. That's why we have that great tape. If I could find the edge of this, there it is. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna tape this on its side, taping it from the strings. What that will do is it will give us some tension to work with as we try to attach the pleats to the collar. All right. So I'm left-handed, so I'm gonna do mine this way, but if you're right-handed, you will be going the other way. So you're just taping the edges. I'm just doing it from the strings. And then I'm going to pull this taut, and I'm just going to do it from the strings on the ties on the other side. So then I wind up with this like sort of, oops, tape came out. Sort of taut, kind of ruff. And what you're going to want to do now is just sort of finagle these pleats so that they're even. This should give you about 4 per inch. It's a little bit of a rough estimate. There's actually going to be a little extra. I cut these a little fuller than they need to be just to make it easier in the beginning. But you just kind of finagle that so that they're all kind of going in the right direction. Voila. And then you're going to take a piece of thread that's about 18 inches doubled. And we're just going to start connecting them together. So starting at the edge, pull it through, tie it off. What I just do is just slip it through itself because it's a doubled thread. And then you're going to whip stitch these on. So starting at one pleat, you just whip stitch it in place. And you can move them as you go. The idea being that you want to keep them as even as possible and keeping this taut. If your strings start to escape, you can retighten it. It does help to use a better tape than I did. And we're just going to stitch along. It's important to tie these down when you work on them because otherwise you might find that it gets twisted and then it's annoying. And you can see when I get to the edge here, I'm just going to sew this a few times and then tie it off in a knot. And then that's it for this side. Now that we've done the first side, we have to do the reverse. So we turn this over. So now you can see that we have half of these done, but not all of it. And we're going to tape it down again and do the exact same thing. Just make sure you can see all of that. Again, about 18 inches of thread will work. Make it nice and secure. Now this time, because your pleats are already situated, you can't really move them that much, but what you can do is try to make sure that they're standing up straight, and then that will make them nice and even. And then we're going to stitch them. And starting on the edge, we got our doubled thread, and we're just going to, again, whip stitch these on. As best we can. Keeping them vertical and pulling them towards us as we go. Again, there's going to be about a 1/4 inch between each of them. That's a rough estimate. It's not going to be exact. It's for our cats. It's okay, guys. Coming to the end here. Just a few more stitches, and we're going to stitch this last one and just stitch it again into knots. You guys, you did it. I can't believe it. We made the thing. Yay. All right, tie that off, untape it, voila. Ruff. It's a simple one. Not historically accurate, but that's not really what we're going for. Super great. Awesome, now for the best part. You love it? Oh, yeah, you're my sweet boy. Yeah, oh, show it off. Oh, you look so good.